Hi, this is Risa.
And this is Tony.
Hi, Tony. So I wanted to talk to you today about a lot of the writing that you do. You do a lot of comics. You are also into screenplays and uh, comedic scripts. So let's just dive right in. So how many comic books do you have out there, and how did you get into it?
I got into comic books because I looked at the different media and I've been rejected by most of them. And I looked at comics as, oh, well, maybe here's a medium that would reject me. And the entry bar seemed to be low, so I decided to start doing comics. My first comic was a self-published comic called Jersey Devil.
Mm-hmm.
And that was based on the legend of the Jersey Devil. It's kind of like action and folklore.
And do you do your own art?
No, I don't do any art. I work with different artists all over the world.
So how do you find the artists to work with? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
After I did Jersey Devil, I got a publishing deal with Kenzer and Company, and I did a fantasy comic called The Travelers. And right around then, I got hired to do Simpsons comic stuff. So I started writing for The Simpsons. And during that time, I decided that the print medium was going the way of the dodo. So me and my artists, we started doing webcomics right around 2000. We started looking into it.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we primarily do webcomics online.
So how did you find your artists? I'm sorry, you were giving me something. How did you find your artists to work with?
We find them online mostly. Sometimes you meet them at comic book conventions and, that kind of thing. Comic book conventions is a good place to network.
And what are the major comic book conventions that you think somebody should go to if they're looking to break into comic book writing?
Well, comic book writing, if you want to break into it, the first thing you need to understand is that it's a different kind of medium. Unlike screenplays, which are dialogue-driven, the comic book is driven by the visuals. So with a screenplay, you might describe a room and where the characters are. But with a comic book, you can't just describe that. You have to describe their actions. You have to describe how the visuals change. And you have to do the dialogue on top of that. So it's a bit of an adjustment if you ever written a screenplay. Screenplays are very sort of lean and they just move really well, whereas comic books, you're trying to communicate to the artist. And it's very difficult because artists are kind of wired differently than most people. They're visually oriented. Sometimes they go off the reservations and draw dinosaurs and vampires and robots in the background just because they're bored.
Mm-hmm.
So it's tough to deal with that because you need an artist that's very in tune with your idea. And if you're writing a lot of comedy, sometimes there's very crazy visuals involved, but sometimes it's just people sitting around talking at a bar.
So you mentioned screenwriting. Have you written a screenplay, and how many have you written, if so?
I've written so many screenplays. I started with screenwriting before I got into comics. I had 2 or 3 screenplays produced. You could look me up on the IMDb. I just finished up a trilogy of screenplays last summer, and they're going in production this summer. I can tell you that the title is The Protector of the Gods. That's the first one, but I can't tell you anything more than that.
Are these inspired by your own comics, or is this brand new material?
A lot of my spec stuff is my ideas, but as a screenwriter and a freelancer, you're often hired to write other people's ideas. So I've written a lot of crime stuff, a lot of comedy, a lot of fantasy stuff, because that's all the stuff that's in my wheelhouse. And a lot of the stuff I write too is the sort of things I do for RPGs, which is another sideline of mine. Dungeons and Dragons type stuff. I did a game which was Complete Mafia for D20, where I took the Dungeons and Dragons rules and applied them to mafia families.
Mm-hmm.
So people could play mafia guys in their own world.
So what year did you actually do your first self-publishing? Because you said your first comic was self-published. What year was that?
That would have been 96, was Jersey Devil #1. That was right around the time everybody was getting out of comics. The Superman had died in like 92, and in 93 there was this gigantic boom of comics. Everybody got into comics. Right around that time I was doing a local TV show called The Comic Book Show, which aired on Channel 61 in Philadelphia. And I really got into the scene. I met a lot of the major players. But within 2 or 3 years, the whole thing had collapsed in on itself. So by the time I actually got the print in 96, the comic book industry was just sort of struggling along. It sort of came back in the early 2000s a little bit and kind of plateaued to where it is now. A lot of people think because of the Marvel movies that comic books are selling really well. They've never really sold super well since like the 1940s because the distribution is very archaic and it's very hard to sell comics. The price point is very high, which is why now everything's moving to the internet. A lot of the up-and-coming creators that normally would start with their own self-published sort of fanzine kind of publications have all moved to the internet because it's so much cheaper. You don't have the overhead of printing, which if you're an artist or creator, it's just really cost prohibitive to print and ship and, be a publisher. But now you can just publish on the internet and everybody sees you in a matter of minutes.
So do you use Amazon for that?
I have my own site. I use WordPress for the site. For the electronic downloads, which is more what you're thinking, there's a bunch of different services out there. I don't use any of those because I don't do electronic download. People come to my site. There are ads on the site that help pay for it. It's free to come to the site at the webcomicfactory.com and superprat.com. And you just come and you can read whatever you want.
That sounds a lot different from what a lot of writers are doing, at least of comic books and graphic novels. I know a lot use Amazon, and most of the writers that I talk to who are self-published, they primarily rely on Amazon, especially Kindle Unlimited.
Yeah, it's if you're still using the print model, but it's tough because there aren't a lot of people who want to pay for this stuff now. And when you could read, there are graphic novels on the internet that are 500 pages plus, and they're free to read, and they're awesome.
So how do they get monetized?
You do it through ads, you do it through Patreon, you do it through Kickstarter. You'll eventually do a collected edition. We did that with a couple of our web comics. We put out a collected edition. We have a comic called Post-Apocalyptic Nick, which we did as a Kickstarter. It was pretty successful. I've gotten publishing deals on the side. It's sort of like, whatever you can manage to pull together in the world of publishing. My latest comic that got into print was a webcomic called Lester Crenshaw is Dead, and it's about a comic book geek who gets turned into a vampire, but he's really horrible at being a vampire. And that came out from Comic Mix in October of 2016. So I'm still promoting that and promoting the site, doing all kinds of steps and stuff. I just had a Mo story get on, and that was a lot of fun. And we're just out there constantly slacking the website because that's the central nexus point. And if the fans, love you and they support you, they'll just buy a copy just to, support your website or whatever. Just to have a hard copy. It's almost like a souvenir of the webcomic.
Mm-hmm. So what are the top... I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's a little different sort of business model than typical, pen and paper kind of stuff.
Are there any marketing techniques that you use to drive traffic to your website?
Yeah, I go to social media, of course. Right now, Reddit's pretty good to me. Stumble Upon is still bringing in the hits. I buy little webcomic ads on other people's webcomic sites. I trade ads with people through Project Wonderful. Mostly social media. Every once in a while, I'll go to comic book conventions. I'll pass out a card or a little piece of paper with my website on it, or stickers, or sometimes I do little post-it notes with the Webcomic Factory URL on them. So there's lots of stuff you can do. You can do guest comics. You can, somebody will say, hey, you want to do a guest comic, and I'll write it, and I'll get a little link. I do link exchanges with a lot of webcomics. You put a link on your site to my comics. I put links on my site to your comics, and I'll mention you in the blog. And similar thing with Patreon, where if you, commit to I forget how much it is, $1 a month or $2 a month, you get a link on the site. So there's all sorts of ways you can do it. The main thing is to keep your content consistent and regular. So the people at my site always know that I have a new comic every day. So no matter what happens, there's a new comic up there, and there's always something to read on my site. Plus, we have a huge library of all kinds of different comics. Some of them are funny, some of them are dark, some of them are political. We have a sports comic. We have a comic book about a strip club. We tried a furry comic. We tried a Japanese comic. So we have it all on the site. We experiment with different things. I have a photo comic. So you never know what's going to show up on the site. And the great thing about it is, in the old days when we did print, if you lost your artist, it was a huge, it was just incredibly hard to get a new artist and then come back with a new book. But I have a webcomic called Digital Hobo, which is about being a freelancer. And I think we're on our 7th or 8th artist at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We just, if I lose an artist, it might go off the site for a few months, and then it comes back when I got a new artist. And it's the same character drawn by different people. Right now it's being drawn by Mary George, and she's been doing great. And, we've been getting a lot of hits from it because it's an opportunity. That's more of a slice of life thing for me because I'm a freelancer. So I could do stuff about my life and how horrible it is to be a freelance writer and stuff like that.
Do you have any advice to writers, whether they be fiction writers or comic writers, anything that you could offer for people pursuing self-publishing?
Yeah, just understand that you're not going to be rich. A lot of people romanticize this stuff, and they get caught up in it, and they think, well, I'll take 2 months off of work and then write this thing, and then, I'll be able to 6 months later start paying my bills. It's just not the way it works. It's very difficult. It's a lot like playing the lottery. You can have nice products. You can make some money, but it's very random.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be prepared for that. You have to be prepared to live like an artist. And artists live from paycheck to paycheck. They take gigs when they can. Some of them have a regular job and then do this stuff at night. That's also very difficult. It puts a strain on your relationships. So you just have to be prepared for that. And once you're prepared for that, then pursue the writing. Because I've taken on students over the years, and a lot of them just don't get it. They just romanticize the lifestyle, and they get into it, and I start going, okay, write this, and this, and they soon become overwhelmed with work and quit because they just don't understand. It's a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of work to be self-disciplined, to write every day. You have to write every day. That's a major thing. You have to read. You have to be well-read. You have to know your subjects that you're writing about. And if you're not well-read in them, you have to go and do the research. I can't tell you how many new writers, they just don't do the research and they immediately start making a comic or a screenplay or whatever, and you start reading it and go, this is a huge error here. This is a huge mistake. This isn't what this particular subject's about.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't see it as a craft. And that goes for the people outside that you're going to work for. So if you're a freelancer or a screenwriter, you have to understand that a lot of producers don't really appreciate the work you do. They don't get it. They don't care. They just want, what they think a screenplay should be. So a lot of producers will ask you, well, send me the first 10 pages of your script. And you send them, and they expect like explosions and Jumanji on the first 2 pages. Now that works for some screenplays, certainly, but it doesn't work for all of them.
Right.
And your screenplay may be very good, but the first 10 pages may not be, explosions and Jumanji. So you have to understand the craft. So you have to go back, and sometimes you have to create samples just for producers to see that you can write. And just so they can feel like you can write. So you have to sort of play the part and do the craft despite the people you work for sometimes.
Right.
You also have to work for producers who sometimes they have terrible ideas, but they love them. And you are hired to make them better, but they don't want to hear that. What they really want to hear is, your ideas are great, boss. Now, some producers I've worked with have been great. They're real creative people. The guy I worked for Protector of the Gods, he's a musician and a writer. And so working with him was great. I mean, he was great. I mean, he just knew things. When I would tell him, change this or change that, he would be won over. He was open to that. But a lot of guys I work for, they're never open to that. I've had producers fly in the face of basic science and geology, geography, history, and they don't care. You tell them, hey, you can't have a civil war in this country because it's too small, and it would spill over in other countries. And they just say things like, nobody's going to care.
Mm-hmm.
But, these are real things that people can look up on the internet or have actually been to. So you can't just ignore the audience. But producers sometimes become blinded to their own ideas, as do writers.
Right.
Especially new writers. They'll become blinded to their own ideas, and they fall in love with them. And one of the things that helped me to disabuse myself of those sort of notions is I did improv for 15 years. And doing improv really helps you sort of grind through ideas. If this idea doesn't work, you got 10 more coming down the pipeline because you need to as an improver. You got to constantly just, sift through the fodder and keep coming up with new stuff. And that's what I think, that would be my biggest tip for a new writer. Take some improv. It really helps. It really, really does.
I think that's actually pretty good advice. It certainly pushes you creatively.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where can people read more about you and buy your books? Are there books still on Amazon, or is everything on your website?
Everything's on my website. you can come to the webcomic.factory.com, shoot me an email, and it's not a problem. I can send you a book, whatever you want to pay for. There is stuff on Amazon, all over Amazon. Most of my old stuff's on Amazon, but I still have a lot of it here. And, it's out there. Just do a search for my last name. Once you go to the webcomic.factory.com, you can check out my bio and the various links there. And, come by and buy something. I would love it.
Sounds awesome. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today and sharing your views on especially comic books and screenwriting.
Thank you. Keep writing, everybody.
All right. Thanks.